In the small town of Millfield, sweet Sarah was a vision that haunted men's dreams. At 26, she commanded attention effortlessly, her dirty blonde hair catching sunlight like spun gold, emerald eyes that seemed to peer into your soul, and a voluptuous figure that made men's gazes linger too long. Working at Paws and Claws, the local pet store, she cultivated an image of nurturing innocence. Sarah would cradle frightened kittens against her chest, cooing softly until they purred, while young men pretended to shop for pet supplies they didn't need. Her laughter tinkled like wind chimes on a summer breeze, disarming, enchanting, and ultimately, deadly. What the townsfolk didn't know was that behind her warm smile lay something rotten and festering, a darkness that had been growing since she was a child, when she'd first discovered the heady power of watching light fade from living eyes. The townspeople often remarked how Sarah had a way with animals. They seemed drawn to her gentle touch and soothing voice. Little did they know that same touch had ended so many human lives, that same voice had whispered final comforts to dying men. She perfected her craft over years, learning exactly how to appear vulnerable and sweet while calculating precisely how much poison would cause maximum suffering without too swift a death. Sarah wanted to watch. She needed to witness the moment when her victims realized their fate, that perfect instant when hope abandoned them completely. The town had grown accustomed to Sarah's dating patterns, passionate whirlwind romances that burned bright and extinguished suddenly. Men would fall desperately in love with her, then inexplicably vanish without so much as a goodbye to friends or family. Police investigations yielded nothing. The prevailing theory was that these men simply couldn't handle Sarah's intensity and fled town to avoid the awkwardness of running into her. The truth was far more sinister. These men had never left Millfield at all. They remained in the cool, dark earth beneath Sarah's garden, feeding the vibrant roses that adorned her picket fence, their final screams trapped forever in the soil. Sarah had developed a ritual, 3 weeks of romance, followed by a special dinner invitation to her quaint cottage on the outskirts of town, where she would serve her famous homemade cinnamon rolls, the recipe for which included a secret ingredient that no guest had ever survived to identify. She kept meticulous journals documenting each relationship, recording first dates, first kisses, and the exact moment when she decided how each man would die. The journals, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom, contained locks of hair, photographs of her victims sleeping, and detailed descriptions of their final moments. Some entries were stained with tears, not of remorse, but of ecstasy. Sarah considered herself an artist of death, each murder more refined than the last, each victim carefully selected for maximum pleasure. Sometimes she would visit their shallow graves late at night, lying on the soil and whispering to them, telling them how much she missed their company while stroking the ground that covered their decomposing faces. Ron Matheson became Sarah's newest conquest one balmy spring evening, when he mistakenly paid for her coffee at the local cafe. She had orchestrated the accident perfectly, bumping into him just as he reached the counter, apologizing with fluttering eyelashes and flushed cheeks. By the time she accepted his awkward invitation for dinner the following night, Ron was already ensnared in her web, pupils dilated with infatuation. Sarah found Ron's boyish enthusiasm particularly amusing, the way he constantly texted, his breathless compliments, how he listened to her fabricated childhood stories with rapt attention. She almost felt sorry for him, the way a spider might momentarily regret the fate of a particularly beautiful butterfly before consuming it nonetheless. They became inseparable, and Sarah began to wonder if Ron might actually be different from the others. This hesitation annoyed her. She'd never delayed her finale before. At night, she would lie awake, listening to the whispers from beneath her floorboards, the ghosts of former lovers urging her to complete her collection. Ron was different in ways that both intrigued and unsettled her. He asked questions about her past that were too perceptive, noticed details about her house that others had missed. Once, he commented on the fresh turned soil in her garden, asking what she'd planted there. Another time, he mentioned the peculiar chemical smell in her kitchen, suggesting it reminded him of his college chemistry lab. Sarah began having nightmares where Ron stood at the foot of her bed, eyes hollow and accusing, dirt falling from his lips as he named each man buried in her garden. Still, she couldn't bring herself to rush her ritual. Perhaps, she thought, she would enjoy his death more for the waiting. Perhaps the fear that he somehow knew would make his final moments even more delicious to witness. After exactly 21 days, Sarah invited Ron to her cottage for a special treat. "I've been saving my grandmother's cinnamon roll recipe for someone special," she purred into the phone, knowing the bait was irresistible. Her kitchen smelled of warm spices and treachery as she baked, carefully folding powdered cyanide into the frosting, humming a lullaby her mother once sang. When Ron arrived bearing wildflowers, Sarah's heart skipped a beat, not from love, but from anticipation. His genuine smile as he complimented her home made her almost giddy with excitement. Sarah watched with predatory focus as Ron bit into the first roll, closing his eyes in pleasure at the sweetness. "These are incredible," he moaned, unaware that each bite brought him closer to becoming fertilizer for her garden. She smiled demurely, counting the seconds, watching his throat work as he swallowed death disguised as affection. Sarah had prepared for this moment meticulously. She'd already dug the grave the previous night, lined up the shower curtain to wrap his body, and selected the exact spot in her garden where he would rest eternally. She'd even written his obituary in her journal, describing how he'd suddenly decided to move across the country for a job opportunity. As Ron devoured his third cinnamon roll, Sarah imagined how his face would look in its final agony, how his fingers would clutch at his throat, how he would beg her for help that would never come. She'd perfected her response over the years, wide-eyed confusion, followed by panicked attempts to call for help, all while ensuring her victims remained beyond salvation. The performance excited her almost as much as the killing itself, this dance of pretended innocence. She took a sip of her tea, hiding her smile behind the cup as she watched poison begin its work. The symptoms began gradually. Ron's forehead beaded with sweat, his breathing became labored, and confusion clouded his eyes. "Something's wrong," he gasped, clutching his stomach. "I don't feel right." Sarah feigned concern, placing a cool hand against his feverish cheek, savoring his growing panic. "Maybe you're allergic to cinnamon," she suggested innocently, watching his pupils constrict to pinpoints. What happened next shattered her carefully constructed routine. Ron, in a moment of desperate clarity, fumbled for his cell phone and pressed a number on speed dial. "Dave," he wheezed into the phone before Sarah could stop him. "Something's wrong. Sarah's house, hurry." Sarah lunged for the phone, but her fingers clutched empty air as Ron collapsed forward, his forehead hitting the table with a sickening thud. For the first time in her murderous career, Sarah felt genuine fear slither up her spine. Someone was coming. Someone new. Panic threatened to overwhelm her calculated composure as she frantically tried to think of explanations, alibis, ways to dispose of both Ron and whoever this Dave might be. She considered dragging Ron to the basement immediately, but he was too heavy, and time was running short. She could feel control, her most treasured possession, slipping away like sand through fingers. Sarah checked Ron's pulse. It was faint but still present. Too much sugar in the frosting had diluted the poison, extending his suffering but delaying his death. A mistake. She never made mistakes. Sarah rushed to the kitchen, hands trembling as she searched for a knife, a heavier dose of poison, anything to finish what she'd started before interruption arrived. The voices from beneath the floorboards grew louder, mocking her carelessness, her failure to maintain the perfect record of untraceable murders that had been her pride for so many years. Dave Keller arrived 17 minutes later, his truck skidding on the gravel driveway. Sarah had been frantically trying to drag Ron's nearly lifeless body toward the basement door when the pounding on her front door began. With no choice but to answer, she smoothed her hair, pinched her cheeks for color, and opened the door with tears welling in her eyes. "Thank God you're here." Ron just collapsed. "I think he's having an allergic reaction." Dave pushed past her, rushing to his friend's side. Ron's lips had turned blue, his breathing shallow and rattling. "My God, what did you do to him?" Dave demanded, checking Ron's pulse. Something in Dave's tone, accusation rather than concern, made Sarah realize her performance hadn't convinced him. Her facade cracked like thin ice under too much weight. "Oh, I just put some cyanide in his cinnamon rolls," she replied with childlike simplicity, her voice suddenly devoid of its usual warmth. Dave's head snapped up, his face contorting with horror. "Are you crazy? Why would you do that?" The question seemed to delight Sarah, who giggled as she reached behind the kitchen counter. "Because I like killing men," she explained, as if discussing her preference for chocolate over vanilla. "They're all evil, and the more of them I get rid of, the better." Dave stared at her in disbelief, unable to reconcile the sweet, beautiful woman from the pet store with this creature before him whose face had transformed into something inhuman. Sarah's eyes had taken on a glassy, doll-like quality, reflecting nothing but emptiness and malice. Her confession had been delivered not with the remorse of someone caught, but with the pride of an artist finally able to display her life's work. Dave's military instincts screamed danger even before he noticed her hand moving behind the counter. He had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan by trusting those instincts, and they hadn't failed him yet. He tensed, preparing for whatever might come next, while trying to position himself between Sarah and his dying friend. The sawed-off shotgun appeared in Sarah's hands like a magic trick, the twin barrels pointing at Dave's chest. Her formerly beautiful face had transformed into something inhuman, eyes wide and unblinking, mouth stretched in a rictus grin that revealed too many teeth. Dave's military training kicked in as she pulled the trigger. He lunged forward, grabbing the barrel and forcing it upward. The blast was deafening in the small kitchen, plaster raining down from the shattered ceiling. They grappled for control, Sarah hissing and spitting like a cornered animal, her nails drawing blood from Dave's face. Despite her frenzied strength, Dave managed to wrestle her to the ground, using his belt and electrical cords to bind her thrashing limbs. "You're all the same," Sarah screamed, her voice raw and unrecognizable. "Pigs for slaughter, meat for the garden." Dave ignored her ravings as he called 911, then administered CPR to Ron, forcing breath back into his poisoned lungs until sirens wailed in the distance. Throughout the struggle, Sarah's behavior shifted between calculated threats and incoherent mumbling. She would alternate between promising Dave a special place in her collection and whispering to invisible listeners that she was sorry for failing them. Once restrained, she began reciting names in a sing-song voice: Michael, Thomas, Christopher, James, William, a litany of her victims that made Dave's skin crawl. When the police finally arrived, they found Dave exhausted and bleeding, still performing CPR, while Sarah lay bound on the floor, smiling serenely at the ceiling, her murderous confession having given way to an eerie calm. The paramedics rushed to Ron's side, administering activated charcoal and preparing him for emergency transport. As they worked frantically to save his life, Sarah began humming her mother's lullaby again, the sound so incongruously gentle that several officers visibly shuddered. The police investigation uncovered horrors beyond imagination in Sarah's basement. 23 bodies in various states of decomposition lay in a makeshift catacomb beneath the house, some merely skeletons, others recent enough that identification was possible. Each man had been posed at a macabre dining table, napkins still tucked into collars, poisoned dessert plates placed before them. Sarah had kept souvenirs, wallets, watches, a jar of wedding rings that she would sometimes wear around her neck like gruesome charms. The town of Millfield collapsed into collective trauma. Parents couldn't look at their daughters without wondering what secrets might lurk behind innocent smiles. Ron survived, though the poison had caused permanent heart damage, and he retreated into himself, moving to a remote cabin where he could avoid human contact. Sarah received the death penalty, showing no remorse throughout her trial. Her final words before lethal injection were a curse upon all men, promising eternal torment in the afterlife. Yet even death couldn't contain Sarah's malevolence. Within months of her execution, reports surfaced of a female figure with dirty blonde hair wandering the streets of Millfield at night, the scent of cinnamon following in her wake. Children claimed to hear her singing lullabies outside their windows, and single men began locking the doors after sunset, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, hunted, selected. The town that once prided itself on neighborly trust became a place of suspicion and fear, with parents warning their children never to accept sweets from strangers, especially beautiful women with emerald eyes and recipes passed down through generations. The pet store where Sarah had worked closed down, unable to overcome the association with its former employee, despite multiple renovations and name changes. Animals refused to enter the building, howling and clawing to escape whenever brought inside. Ron's cabin became a reluctant pilgrimage site for true crime enthusiasts, forcing him to move several more times, each location more remote than the last. Dave received commendations for his bravery but suffered from severe PTSD, unable to forget Sarah's eyes or the grotesque tableau in her basement. He avoided dating, suspicious of any woman who showed interest in him. The foundations of Sarah's cottage were demolished and the ground salted, yet nothing would grow there for years afterward. Local children dared each other to spend the night on the property. Those who accepted were never the same afterward, speaking of whispers from the soil and dreams of beautiful women with poison on their lips. The legend of Sweet Sarah became the town's dark legacy, a cautionary tale whispered between lovers, a ghost story that hit too close to home because everyone remembered her smile, her laugh, her way with animals. Everyone remembered how they had trusted her, welcomed her, admired her, never suspecting the death wore such a beautiful face.